This is the Griffin Realty Group Ask-A-Griffin podcast, episode number 49. We continue on our track for closing. And the question on the table is, do I have to follow the dates in my contract? Are you a home seller or buyer who has questions about selling or buying residential property, but you can't find an easy way to get the answers? Well, then, hey, you are definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Griffin Realty Group and the host of the Ask-A-Griffin podcast. Now, to help you take immediate action to get started in the right direction, if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the near future, you can take advantage of our free step-by-step guides waiting for you at griffincourses.com. That's griffincourses.com. All right, let's get started. In this episode, like I said, we're walking through the buyer plan, and we are in the final module, the closing stage. And the question on the table is, do I have to follow the dates in my contract? So the first point here is, think about what a contract is in real estate. It's just that. It's a contract. It means, number one, you have agreed to very particular dates in writing. And so those dates have attached to them action steps that you are supposed to complete. So for example, let's go with the first and most obvious one is actually, if I really state it correctly, it is the initiation of making that contract a sound and viable contract, which means that you have signed it, the seller has signed it, and you have delivered earnest money deposit, so that in the state of Massachusetts, where I'm referencing this at the moment, it's one of those moments where that consummates the contract. So now everything's real and enforceable under contract law. This isn't a real estate issue anymore. This is contract law. So you've entered into this agreement and you've agreed to do certain things. So that's the first date that you're supposed to deliver your earnest money deposit. The second date really would be something like a home inspection or inspections in general. And typically, there's no exact timing for that because, again, if it's a hot market and it's tough to get a home inspector, it might be a little bit longer. Or if there's huge competition, that might be a short period of time. So you've agreed to that, and you have to read that contract. There are some standard language in fill-in-the-blank contracts about these obligations within which you will perform these. These are contingencies, by the way, that protect you. So it's in your best interest to perform your home inspection on time. And then there are there's language and timeframes for if you want to renegotiate the deal or back out based on that home inspection to protect the earnest money deposit, you need to perform. So everything gives you a very hyper-precise date to perform within that time frame. Now think about it. It's such a gear shift to go into the closing module because you didn't really necessarily have a lot of those time pressures or particular dates by which you had to decide what house you wanted to buy. I mean, I get it. In a hot market, maybe you felt some pressure, but you weren't having to adhere to specific dates. But once you get into this contract stage, you definitely have agreed to dates. So that's the most important part here, is that this is a contract in writing with action steps completed by such and such a date. If not, it could be a default. And that leads to the second point here. You, as the buyer, might be subject to monetary penalties should you default on a date. So now in Massachusetts, where I'm referencing, again, like I said, every state, a little bit different. So you have to make sure it's exactly the same. But in Massachusetts, we enter into an offer to purchase contract. And there are certain things or items that are performed in a certain time frame. And then one of those particular items that is stipulated in that initial contract is the initiation of another contract called a purchase and sales agreement. So not only did we sign one, but in there is a time frame within which we go into another. Now, again, I don't want to make this sound overly complicated and scare you because a lot of what happens in real estate is pre-approved legal fill-in-the-blank forms. Now, we as realtors are not practicing law. We are dealing with a commission or a board of registration, pre-formed forms, okay? Pre-formed forms that are fill-in-the-blank where we're not practicing law. They are approved by the board of registration and the legal teams that oversee those and build those. You just want to make sure that your realtor is using a form like that. And again, you might be subject to monetary penalties if you default on one of these dates. So what would be an example? Well, if you don't perform on, say, the purchase and sales date, then you could technically get into this whole debate about, are you out of contract? And that comes up a lot. And it's a sticky point. And again, I'm not going to practice law because you'll see what the third part is here. I'm going to be very careful to say, I am not an attorney, and I am going to tell you to use one in a second. But the point here is that the reason for taking this so seriously at the purchase and sales agreement is because that's typically where you have put down a much bigger chunk of money. See, in the beginning, customary, or you'll see best practices, most people will put down $500 to $1,000 to bind that offer. I can't remember what the minimum is in Massachusetts, but it's an innocuous amount of money, so that if somebody defaults during the home inspection period and they just don't perform, they're subject to losing that, right? Or they could be sued for performance. Right? You can't just default, and you can be sued for all sorts of reasons. Again, I'm going to leave it at that. But at the purchase and sales agreement, if you just default because you decide to, or you just miss dates, you could be putting a big chunk of money at risk. And as realtors, if we get notified by attorneys that there's a debate over this deposit, we just have to leave it in our escrow account unless directed by the Board of Registration. I mean, it becomes a mess. And I'm not trying to scare anybody here. I'm trying to emphasize the point. When you get into these contracts, there are dates and actions. Complete them. That's the bottom line. And that's the third point here, that your best practices as a buyer during this closing process is to understand that you should definitely hire an attorney when you are entering into the purchase and sales agreement, especially. I think the offer is a little bit more innocuous, and that you're really dealing with that initial home inspection phase. And really, the truth is, in our business, nobody really takes the transaction seriously until you're through that, because a lot of people use that as an opportunity to back out. They use it as an opportunity to renegotiate. So a lot of hairy stuff can happen in those first 7 to, let's call it 2 weeks. We'll round up. Customarily, you'll see that kind of a time frame. But when you get to that purchase and sales agreement, now we're talking about language that deals with title. So remember, you're not just buying the property, you're buying the title to the property. So there are all sorts of things that could happen. And of course, if you're putting a mortgage on it, well, the mortgage company's not going to take you very seriously until you enter in a purchase and sales agreement. You've shown some money down, and you've really gone through a full vetting and underwriting process before they ever put their attorney onto it, and the attorney puts their title researcher onto it. You see, there's a lot going on here. And so people want to make sure that there's a seriousness of purpose, which continues to elevate the later the dates get, especially the signing of the purchase and sales agreement. That really kicks in a lot of what goes on here. Okay, so let me chunk this back up for you. The question is, in the closing section, do you have to take the dates in your contract seriously? Again, rhetorical questions here. Of course you do. And really the reason why is, the first point is, you've agreed to this. And you've agreed to do these particular things by these particular dates, and you put it in writing and put money at risk. And that's the second point. You might be subject to monetary penalties should you default on a date, meaning you'll lose your deposit money. And you might be sued for some other negligence. Who knows? You don't know who is on the other side and what they're up to if they get mad, right? And lastly, the best practice is just hire an attorney. It's the smartest thing to do. They are expert at contract law. They might want to add addendums to standard purchase and sales agreements or whatever they might do. But the best practice is just stick to the dates and do what you said you were going to do. And if not, I always say this, if not, just secure extensions in writing or withdraw from the deal formally so you don't put your money and yourself at risk, okay? I'll summarize it this way. When buying a property, you're subject to certain dates that you've agreed to stick to. You've agreed to stick to these. So if you don't take those dates seriously as deadlines for your performance, you might be subject to certain monetary penalties. So it's best to hire an attorney when entering into written contracts, and always best to perform on time. All right, remember, you can take, remember, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the very near future by getting our free step-by-step guides at griffincourses.com, griffincourses.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen, or find us on any of our social media channels so you don't miss out on the insights each time we upload an episode. We'd also appreciate it, of course, if you would comment on our stuff. That way we know what you are thinking and we can help you even deeper, okay? But remember this, I sign off the same way every time. Nobody's coming for you. So go get to work on your own plan for buying or selling property, and we will see you in the next episode to help you do just that. Thanks again.